There are a lot of options. That is the good news, is that anxiety and depression are very treatable for individuals of all ages. So the first thing I recommend, and of course, I'm very biased as a therapist, but therapy is really one of the best things you can do for yourselves and for your children. I think everyone should be in therapy at some point in their lives, regardless of what they're going through. I've been to therapy, and I've been on the other side of that. It's been helpful, and so I do strongly encourage adults and seeking it for their children, that you seek some type of therapeutic services. So that can come in different forms. That can be individual therapy, that can be family therapy, that can be group therapy, or even couples therapy if it's something that's affecting the couple. So for anxiety, there's a lot of research supporting the cognitive and the behavioral therapies. Certainly a lot of empirical support for those treatments. They're very effective. And what those types of therapies do is it teaches us to recognize how our thoughts perpetuate anxiety. We cause a lot of chaos right up here, just in our own mind. So the way our thinking patterns can certainly make anxiety worse. So cognitive therapies and behavioral therapies, they teach us relaxation. They teach us how to manage our thought processes. They teach us how to cope with irrational thinking that can make anxiety worse, and they can be very, very effective, and they work for children too. Medication is a possibility, so and we'll talk about that a little bit later too. That certainly can be helpful, and research does support that medication in combination with therapy is often the most effective forms of treatment for anxiety. For adults, I recommend reducing caffeine use. And I know caffeine is a staple for many of us. It's a staple in my life, especially now. But excessive caffeine can actually make your anxiety symptoms a lot worse. So just be mindful of what your caffeine intake is. You don't need to cut it out altogether, but you might just need to reduce it or cut it off earlier in the day. I try to teach my clients how to look for the red flags. So look for the warning signs. How do you know when that anxiety is starting to increase? How do we know that we might be on the verge of panic? Our body and our minds warn us. We just have to get to a place where we listen to our bodies, listen to what is happening up here. So really getting to know those red flags and those warning signs so that we can put some preventative measures in place and cope with the anxiety more effectively. Education is key. Once we realize that anxiety is a problem for us, then educate yourselves on it. There's no shortage of education out there on anxiety. It's easily accessible through the internet. And so the more educated we are on something, the less power it has over us. Try to establish predictable routines, not to the point where it has to dictate your entire day, but routine is important in managing anxiety. And set new and healthy boundaries for yourselves. What I have seen in my clinical work is that so many of our problems can be traced back to a lack of boundaries. So a lack of boundaries just invites chaos into our lives. And so I think now more than ever is a great time for us to reevaluate our boundaries. And what I mean by that is boundaries for yourselves, boundaries for your family. What do you consider acceptable and unacceptable for your life? And you have a say in that. So now with the COVID-19 crisis, I think this is an ideal time for individuals and families to really take a look at their boundaries and determine, is this sufficient for what we're going through right now? So with children, again, we're going to see a lot of similar treatment options: therapy, medication, education. It's up to us as parents to provide emotional safety for our children. And we do that by not being reactive to them. We don't have to be emotional weather vanes with our children. I'll be the first to acknowledge that that's really hard. And I know we're not always going to be able to do that. But when we recognize what our child is struggling with, when we recognize what that anxiety looks like for them, if we can respond with calm and emotional safety and a safe place for them to come to us and talk about what they're going through, that does make a difference. We also want to teach and model healthy coping skills for them. As I said earlier, they're watching us, they're learning what we do. So if we're modeling for them how to cope with anxiety in a healthy manner, they're likely to pick that up. And then praising any accomplishment, no matter how small, anything that they're doing, make sure that you're reinforcing the good behavior, the healthy coping that they might be using, and praise them. That's going to matter quite a bit.
And what are some practical behavioral tools for depression,
Okay.
whether for adults or children?
Sure. So we're going to see some overlap. Again, I can't emphasize enough just how important therapy is. We're going to use some of those similar strategies, cognitive behavioral treatments. For children, we're going to use things like play therapy and art therapy that are more age appropriate. We can't just spend an hour sitting face to face and just talking to a child. That's not always going to be effective. So there are different therapeutic modalities that are very appropriate for children and very effective. Again, we're going to explore the possibility of medication. Exercise is a natural remedy for depression, and that's supported by research too. Now, I know right now people aren't able to be in the gym. I know the ability to have a regular exercise routine might be disrupted, but if you can just get a little bit of movement in every day, and if it's just walking around the block or just walking up and down your steps a few extra times, just having that movement can be a natural remedy for improving our mood. So recognizing early warning signs, as I said before, I'll give you an example. I knew somebody a long time ago who struggled with major depression. And a warning sign for her, she would put a load of laundry in the washing machine and she would let it sit for days to the point where it would mold, the clothes would mold. And that she came to recognize that that's an indication that I am spiraling. I am moving deeper into a depressive episode, because when she was healthy and functional, that didn't happen. She did her laundry, she was done. So recognizing red flags like that, we all have them. So the key is learning to pick up on those sooner rather than later so that you can start to cope more effectively, or call your doctor or call your therapist if you need to. Enhancing our social support system. So how do we build up that social support? How do we reach out? And that can be hard with depression because the tendency is to want to isolate and just go inward. So being very intentional about building that social support system can be really helpful. Set reasonable goals and expectations. I think this is really important now. I know I have really had to redefine what my goals and expectations are for myself, my work, my children, the way my house looks. When we're struggling with depression, it is okay to readjust those expectations and to set them lower. And that doesn't mean that we're getting rid of the quality of something or that we don't care. It just means that we're being very mindful of what we are able to do in that moment. So that's really a key piece. If the depression is severe enough that it's causing us to think about wanting to hurt ourselves, then we should really establish a safety plan. And that can look different ways. That can be alerting your therapist, alerting your prescriber, alerting family members. I've had clients who they have all their medication, they give it to a family member so that they don't have access to that medication in case they think about wanting to take more pills than prescribed. So there are different things we can do with a practical safety plan to ensure that a person's not going to harm themselves. Okay. In regard to children, so again, we're seeing very similar strategies. I do want to mention for parents listening to this, so suicide is currently the second leading cause of death for our adolescents, okay, age 13 to 19, second leading cause of death, which if we think about that, I mean, just really think about what that means for our youth, that we're at that point. As parents, we have to be having these discussions with our children, and I know they're not comfortable conversations to have. I first want to say that talking about suicide with your child is not going to put the idea in their head to commit suicide. That is a myth, and a myth that has been refuted by research, so it's not true. I just want to put that out there. Not talking to them is actually more dangerous than talking to them about it. So I tell families, talk about the S word in your family. Talk about suicide, talk about self-harm. So in the way we do that is we create that sense of emotional safety for our children, where we let them know that you can tell me anything and I'm not going to get upset. I'm not going to act shocked. I'm not going to lash out at you because you told me this. So we have to really own our part as parents and make sure that we're providing that emotional safety for our children. It is perfectly acceptable to sit face to face with your child and say, have you ever thought about hurting yourself? Have you ever thought about wanting to die? Do you have days where you just feel like you don't want to be here anymore? Okay, so it is okay to have those conversations, and it can be life-saving. So don't necessarily wait for your child to come to you with that, because sometimes they won't. Sometimes they don't know how to talk about that, or they're afraid or embarrassed to talk about it. So we have to be proactive as parents and put it out there. And I've had those discussions with all of my children. Even if I don't see any warning signs, I still talk about it with them.